Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to the RE Journals Breaking Through the Disruption webinar series. We are RE Journals. In addition to RE Journals, we also own a number of different commercial real estate trade journals across the Midwest and down into Texas. Everything from Minnesota Real Estate Journal, Midwest Real Estate News, and our Texas product is Red News. For anybody in the state of Minnesota, we're based in Minnesota. Our company is based in Minnesota, and today's program, we are offering real estate continuing education credits for folks in the state of Minnesota. And in order to receive those continuing education credits, you're going to need to do a couple things. You're going to need to stamp yourself in and stamp yourself out today. And then also put in the chat box on the right, please type in your name and your license number if you have that. Type in your name and your license number right now, and then when you exit today, you're going to be doing the exact same thing today. So please, if you need those real estate continuing education hours, today's webinar has been approved for 1 hour of real estate continuing ed by the Minnesota Department of Commerce. We are also going to be doing 2 random polling questions throughout today's program, and those questions need to be answered once again on the chat button off to the right. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Katie Benninger from my team, and her email and her phone number is listed right there. If you're having any connection issues today, a couple things. Number one, on the top of your screen, there is going to be a red button. All you have to do is simply hit reconnect. And if that's not working, try it again. And if that's not working, open up a new browser. And ideally, if you can use Google Chrome is the best browser to be using today. And as I mentioned before, we have a chat box over to the right. This is a great spot for you to ask questions of the panelists today. Please just state who you are, what company are you with, and ask any questions. And the moderators and the speakers are going to be able to answer those questions throughout today's webinar. All right. Today's webinar, in addition to about 45 other webinars that we've hosted over the last 3 months or so, can be found on our website at rejournals.com/video replay. Once again, that's rejournals.com/video replay. All right, on with today's program. It's COVID-19 impact on the life science and MedTech industry. Now let me pull up our speakers, and I'm going to pull up our speakers' bios here. Hang on one quick second. Our moderator is Patrick Sieb. He's Director of Economic Development for DMC, that's Destination Medical Center, out of Rochester, Minnesota. Also is Dr. Clark Otley, Medical Director, Department of Business Development with the Mayo Clinic. Brent Webb, Development Manager, Mortensen. Pam York, Founder and General Partner with Capital 3. And finally, Mike Brown, Senior Director, National Leader, Life Science Practice Group, Colliers. All right, Patrick, it's all yours. Take it away, and I'm going to pop up your presentation.
Great, wonderful. So thank you very much to RE Journal, and we are excited to be here. My name is Patrick Sieb. I'm with Destination Medical Center, and you saw that photograph of me, and it was not only was that photograph taken pre-COVID, but I think it was my I think I was just getting out of high school at the time. But here I am today, and really excited to be a part of this panel. We have a great team of folks that we're going to learn from. And just to kick this off, I again want to say I'm with Destination Medical Center, which is Minnesota's largest economic development initiative in Rochester, Minnesota, home to Mayo Clinic. Our work really involves investing public resources in growing the economy of Rochester in support of Mayo Clinic's growth. Mayo Clinic, of course, leading hospital and healthcare service organization in the country, perhaps the world, and we're going to hear from one of its leaders today. And they've certainly been front and center in thinking about the direct impact of COVID and ways of addressing it. But beyond that, and we're going to hear from Dr. Otley about how he sees this affecting life science in general. But again, we have a great panel, and we are going to, I'm going to let each of them, oh, I should say that behind the scenes, one of my colleagues, Chris Shad, Director of Business Development for Discovery Square, which you'll be hearing more about, is helping me in fielding questions and pitching questions to our panelists. But before we do that, before we get into that, I'd like to have each of the panelists do a bit of a self-introduction, and I'll turn to you first, Dr. Otley.
Thank you, Patrick. Delighted to be here with everybody for this really timely and interesting discussion. My name is Clark Otley. I'm a dermatologic surgeon at Mayo Clinic. I'm practicing every day, and I am the medical director of the Department of Business Development. Partnering with Jim Rogers, we lead business development in terms of life science, technology, commercialization, and development at Mayo Clinic. And I'm also the Chief Medical Officer of a new entity at Mayo Clinic called the Mayo Clinic Platform. And I work with Patrick on the Destination Medical Center Economic Development Agency.
So Dr. Otley is clearly a rock star, and will bring a lot of content to this for those of you who are primarily in the real estate business. What I think you're going to hear from Dr. Otley is, where does he see things going in the life science sector? Likewise, we have Pamela York. Pamela, Pam, would you go ahead and do a self-introduction as well?
Sure, Patrick. As Clark said, I'm really delighted to be here for this conversation. Lots been happening, so it'll be really interesting to have this conversation with the group. I am the founding managing director of Capita 3. We are a venture capital group that's headquartered in Minneapolis. We invest in early stage companies in health and healthcare, and we invest around the U.S. I also have a science and engineering background, and ironically, early in my career, I helped develop the underlying technology for the fiber optic network that makes all of this digital health and telehealth possible. And so kind of coming full circle here with bandwidth being a key issue in making sure that telehealth really thrives in the future.
Well, I think we're going to thank you, and I'm glad to know we learn something every time as we get reintroduced to our speakers. I've known Pam for quite some time. I did not know that part of your history and record, and I think we're going to learn more about the direction of telemedicine through this conversation, and I appreciate knowing your early work in the infrastructure to support it. Brent Webb, who may or may not be on just at this moment, he may have had some connection issues. So Brent, I don't see you on the screen, so I'm guessing at this moment you haven't logged in yet, and we will introduce you when you're able to log in. Pending that, let me turn to you, Mike, and let you do an introduction of yourself.
Okay, thank you very much, Patrick. I'm Mike Brown. I'm the national leader for the Collier's Life Sciences Practice Group. I've been in the commercial real estate business for close to 40 years and spent 20 of those years focused only on life sciences related real estate. So my background includes experience with research facilities, vivarium facilities, small and large molecule process manufacturing facilities, PCR labs, medical device, and probably as much as anything that I do right now has to do with advanced therapeutic medical products, ATMPs. So that's my background. I have a group of people that work with me across the country, about 45 people, and all in different geographic settings, but most of the major clusters and even the emerging clusters are covered by my team.
So thank you. And with that as brief introductions of each of our panelists, and again, when Brent from Mortensen joins, we'll give him the floor to make an introduction. But we asked Mike if he wouldn't help frame this discussion. And I appreciate the work he did in preparing kind of an outline of key themes. And so the way we're going to manage this discussion is I'm going to ask Mike to introduce a couple of key themes and then turn to our other panelists to reflect on those and give their observations. And so let's start with this first one, Mike.
Okay. So I think it's pretty obvious that the SARS-CoV-2 effect is having an impact on a lot of different industries. In the real estate industry, landlords typically not involved in life science real estate, but looking at office and retail, they're facing very uncertain and very difficult times right now. So vacancies and subleases are on the rise, and landlords are scratching their heads trying to figure out what to do with their space. It's amazing to me how many landlords across the country are trying to repurpose their buildings for life sciences, research and development primarily, and in some cases for manufacturing. So it seems to be the hot ticket right now, along with industrial real estate in the real estate industry, and landlords are rushing to get there.
Well, I think what this is suggesting, and we've been reading this in the literature, that in the real estate world in this during this period of disruption, the likely silver lining is in the life science industry, and that may be the most important play that people in the real estate world can focus on. And I think I'll just turn to this slide as the way to help tee up that conversation, to just talk about why is life science still a relevant commercial development. And Mike, again, just pick up on this. And this is where Dr. Otley and Pam, I'm going to ask you to give share some observations and reflections. So just to tee this up, Mike.
Yep. So social distancing has not prevented research from continuing, but it has slowed the process. As Dr. Otley and Pam both know, research takes people, and it takes a fair number of people working together and collaborating in the lab. So it slows the process when we try to socially distance and or work on separate schedules with alternate people coming in at different times. However, funding for the companies that are involved, particularly in ATMPs, has been off the charts. The amount of funding that is available today, it's being called a historic time period for raising life science capital. Mergers and acquisitions have slowed a little bit, just because attention spans have grown short and focus has turned towards vaccine and or standard of care for treating the virus. So we expect mergers and acquisitions to continue, but demand remains very, very strong and funding is very good.
Thank you. I think that's this is going to lead to, I think, a interesting conversation and sort of truth testing, if you will, with the scientists in the room. But before we do that, Brent, I see that you joined, and welcome. And we've done self-introductions, and I'll give you the floor to do that as well.
Thank you. Obviously, with the new normal of trying to navigate technology, even though I restarted my computer before this, and I had to restart my phone, I'm actually calling from my phone. At least the good news is you can see me and I can now hear everybody. So Great. Thank you for having me. Again, my name is Brent Webb with Mortensen. I am the lead developer for Discovery Square 2. So interestingly, back in 2016, one of the reasons why I ended up joining Mortensen is because of the award we received for One Discovery Square. And that project was very pioneering in that it was really trying to create this ecosystem of collaboration to foster new innovation, to eventually create new technologies that changed people's lives. And so how do you actually do that in a real estate setting, which was really our challenge. And I think, fortunately, we had really great partners with the EDA, we had really great partners with Mayo, And then we were able to secure some great tenants that really bought into the idea. But I believe a lot of it was rooted in this unique access that people were going to have to Mayo to create new technologies and the 3 unique uses that they provided within the building. But I also think it was creating this culture of collaboration. And, we did that physically within the building itself by making it more open. You have that large staircase when you walk in. We also have that partnership with Cafe Steam that creates this really unique atmosphere on the first floor. But it's also our partnership with the Music Camp group that did intentional programming to help create those new connections, to create new technologies.
So let's come back to that development per se
Sure.
in a moment. But say, maybe for the audience sake, just say a bit about Mortenson and who Mortenson is.
Sure. So Mortenson, I think a lot of people know our group because of our construction company. We're the #1 stadium contractor in the country. But interestingly, we actually have 13 different business lines. We're the largest wind and solar installer in the country. I work for their development team, and we have 13 offices across the country, with our newest being in Salt Lake. So we're active kind of across all markets. And the unique thing about us is that although we're a large organization, we scale appropriately. We have a national perspective that we can bring to a hyper-local level. And we're based in Minneapolis. So I think obviously have a lot of different connections both nationally and here locally.
Great, thank you. So Dr. Otley, Mike hypothesizes, it says that mergers and acquisitions have slowed, but collaborative partnerships have increased. And in your role with business development at Mayo Clinic, is that what your experience has been? Or tell the audience what your experience has been in terms of the business development work that is happening at Mayo Clinic. And you may want to just say what business development means in the context of your role there.
Sure. Thanks, Patrick. BD at Mayo Clinic covers the full spectrum of commercialization of technology to strategic partners, mergers, and acquisitions. So we're really a full service shop for our 70,000 person, $12.5 billion medical organization. Really uncertain times in all of the world right now. And we went into the pandemic nervous, understandably. We didn't know how this would all play out. We had a reformulation and a reassessment of our business plan for business development, not knowing what was going to happen. And we had some doomsday scenarios, and they proved not to be true. We have seen nothing but incredible activity. And it's interesting. It's an amazing time to be a scientist right now. The world needs us. We need medications, and everybody now has an opinion on vaccines and medications and plasma. So this is a really vibrant time to be in the life sciences and really exciting. We're seeing incredible opportunities on the medication front, the diagnostic front. We're even seeing novel devices that are related to the pandemic and how to care for patients carefully. And then, of course, MedTech, as Pam said, we're thinking about how do we continue to take care of patients in a different paradigm from a distance. And this has really spurred so much innovation. So the disruption that the pandemic has caused is equally in proportion to the innovation that it's caused. So I would say it's a boom time for the life sciences, really exciting. And we've lost our nervousness, and we are full force ahead with Mayo Clinic and our life science innovation. Wonderful.
Pam, is that translating into energy in the capital market and the investment markets? Are people are you finding deal flow and resources coming into the market?
Yeah, definitely. As Mike had on his slide, we're seeing record levels of investment in Q1 and Q2, actually, across a broad number of sectors in health and healthcare and life sciences and biotech. I think this is for a lot of reasons, some of which, Dr. Otley mentioned. But part of it is some trends that have been in the making for a long time that I think really got accelerated by the coronavirus. And as an example, 5 of the 7 IPOs that occurred in the first quarter of 2020 were biotech companies, primarily developing new therapeutics. Now that was early in the quarter, and obviously those IPOs slowed down or halted once the coronavirus really hit. But that's a trend that's been in the making for quite some time. And I think another trend we're seeing really is the convergence of technology, artificial intelligence, drug development, biotech. The convergence of those technologies is extremely exciting, and a lot of investors are jumping into those areas. And I would just say there was a bit of a slowdown in investment in March and April. If you look at the data, while everybody was just kind of taking stock of what's happening. I mean, we each had our own lives to deal with. How am I dealing with my own life and my family and the logistics there? But then also a lot of people looking around and saying what's going to happen. But a lot of people did surveys and took measures, and everybody pretty much said, what's happening here is not is going to have minimal impact on the investment in these technologies and these areas in life science that are just core to human health, and will continue to be so. And then when you add to that all the new technologies that are being rapidly developed for coronavirus, from diagnostics to pulmonary, it's actually an incredibly exciting time to be an investor.
So it sounds like Mike's point early on that there is a play to be made in life sciences, and that's perhaps the most active market, and likely in the foreseeable future the most active market in commercial real estate, seems to ring true with the two of you, Pam and Dr. Otley, and the experiences that you're living right now. And I'm seeing nods, but I'm going to now turn to Brent and say, why not just flip commercial office buildings into life science buildings? Does that work?
Really question. I mean, a lot of people are always of you when you think about the cost for replacing new buildings versus existing. But I think the reality is that the requirements that we're seeing with these new companies, the technology infrastructure that's needed to help support these companies to deliver these new technologies, it's really expensive to retrofit an existing building in order to accommodate that. And so everything from you seeing buildings having to be 5G ready, we're investing additional infrastructure for new technology so our second building has a wired score, which just means that we're allowing it to be future-proofed to allow for extra bandwidth for more companies to be able to adapt to technology over time. But also there's just the intrinsic nature of what's required for research, which is the additional infrastructure for vibration mitigation, which is really expensive to retrofit within existing buildings.
Helpful, thank you. I see Jeff from RE Journals. Are you? I know you're going to help field any questions that we might get from the audience, and I would just encourage the audience to use that chat function to ask questions, and I know our panelists will welcome any that you might have. I think we lost our slides. I'm not sure where the slides are. Here we go. Let's take a look at the next question or the next point that you put out there, Mike, and just walk through this, and let's talk about some of these. But you go ahead and tee this up.
Sure. So as Brent was saying, it's building purpose-built research facilities or process manufacturing facilities is very expensive. And to be able, for people who are practicing robust science, it can be very, very expensive. So the question about converting existing facilities to research and development facilities, the location and proximity of a lot of office buildings does not meet the standards of being located in an innovation community. Mm-hmm. They weren't built in an innovation community, they were standalone. Mm-hmm. So there's a challenge. Physical constraints that Brent had mentioned, converting office buildings with undersized shafts, slab-to-slab ceiling heights that don't offer enough space for mechanical equipment above the ceiling. power that's coming into the building that's going to be required. Upgrading power is expensive. And there's probably going to be some deficiencies in what we would call layout areas around the buildings for either bulk tank gas storage, nitrogen, backup generators, things that you're going to need in order to keep the lab functional. The big question is that these landlords are used to doing business at a certain level, and mostly, looking at an average of $65 a square foot for tenant improvements in an office building versus the life science friendly landlords who build these purpose-built buildings and are willing to provide $100 to $150 a square foot to the tenant in order to convert the space to exactly the type of facility they need. So it's going to take a strong stomach. It's going to take a leap of faith on their part. And the question remains, when landlords really see the cost, are they going to be willing to get into it and take the risk?
So I read a few things out of what you're saying. One being that people who have done work in the life science industry, Brent Webb and Mortensen as an example, have experience around what it's going to take to deliver the kind of building that's necessary, including the deep pockets that might be necessary to set those buildings up for success. But the first point that you make here, and I want to just throw this to Dr. Otley and to Pam, talk about proximity, and I think proximity to talent might be a point that comes up, and the idea that we are is there value still in the life science innovation districts being in the core of the city that is maybe important for attracting talent and attracting young people. Thoughts about that? Like, could we just do this in a suburban area, or does it still matter to be proximal to sort of a critical mass of activity?
I can make some comments. Look what we're doing right now. Everything's changed. So we're all sitting in our own physical locations. We're having an engaging, dynamic conversation that would not have happened 10 months ago. And we're all used to it. And it's weird, and we miss our old ways. We miss getting together for conferences and things like that. So I don't think this virtual world will replace it. And certainly on a collaboration level, our best collaborations are absolutely with close physical proximity. And Brent can tell you the things that happen in Discovery Square 1, the magic happens in those kind of down times when you meet somebody and you start to engage them and something unexpected comes out of that kind of personal interaction. That being said, our workforce at Mayo Clinic is increasingly distributed across the country and across the world. And we're very comfortable with our business development colleagues living in San Diego. I was talking with somebody this morning in San Diego. He lives there and he's been commuting back and forth prior to this, and now he's set and he is in San Diego permanently right now. So there's a new way we're working, and I think we can balance that. And I guess if I had to emphasize one word, it's flexibility. We're all learning flexibility, and the buildings and the workflows probably have to reflect that kind of flexibility. Yeah,
understood. Pam, additional thoughts, additional perspective on that?
Sure. I totally underscore what Dr. Otley was saying. And most of my experience with life science real estate has been with universities. So, was part of building out a new life science incubator at University of Iowa for really housing startup companies, spun out of the University of Iowa. I've been involved with the University Enterprise Lab up here, and other places. And I would just say that it's the key, in my view. Proximity can be extremely important, especially if it's very difficult to get faculty, for example, from their lab to the incubator. If they've started a company, I think proximity is extremely important. But I'm currently looking at a space called Incubology, which you may be aware of, and that's in the suburbs up here. And it seems to be a growing and thriving organization that has figured out some of the core factors and the flexibility that Clark was talking about. And I would just say the key is what's called value proposition. I teach a class called Value Proposition Design for faculty and graduate students, scientists and engineers when they have new technologies and startups. And the idea is to really understand who is my customer and what do they need. And so I think it's going to vary by location. It's going to vary by demographics and what companies are there. But certainly having flexible space that allows for startups which don't have a lot of capital versus more mature companies which do, and somehow bringing them all together in this very collaborative, flexible space is, I think, what we need to see more of.
I think that is this notion of flexibility, this notion that the world is changing around us as we speak. Brent used the term future-proofing the building, and specifically mentioning the wire score, which is really the infrastructure in the building that would allow for growth of bandwidth demand in a world, a life science world that increasingly involves technology, artificial intelligence. You mentioned, Pam. I wonder, for the audience, Dr. Otley and/or Pam, if you guys could just talk about what is this intersection between technology and life sciences. But you mentioned AI, and I just think it would be helpful to talk about what that means, and just for our audience to even understand what those terms mean in this context.
Pam, do you want to take that first?
Sure. I think it varies widely by the product and service, but certainly we can look at the infrastructure around software. Software as a service is really the core to telehealth and telemedicine, digital therapeutics. So through the rise of technology and software platforms has really enabled this realm of telemedicine. Another core area would be people used to call it big data. Now they're saying more artificial intelligence and machine learning. It's sort of taking all of that massive data that we have and using that for a variety of purposes. It might be for making drug development process more efficient. That's actually been, increasing the efficiency of the drug development process using data has been something that's been promised for a really, really, really long time. And I think it's finally getting to the point where that actually is actually happening. Same thing with artificial intelligence in terms of clinical decision support and shortening the time it takes for clinicians to make decisions about how to help patients.
You're exactly right, Pam, and we're seeing that come to life at Mayo Clinic. We have a new platform called our Clinical Data Analytics Platform, which can contain all of Mayo Clinic's data in a de-identified fashion. We're actually in the process of de-identifying it and then applying very powerful artificial intelligence analytic tools and data science tools in a federated model so that we keep private all the personal information and trying to gain insights that will help us get new drugs, new targets, new improvements in clinical trials so that we have a more concentrated and accurate patient population upon which to test these medications so that the most people will benefit. And then, as Pam mentioned, the digital therapeutics, we're actually seeing technology that actually can impact your health, sometimes for the worse, but we're trying to harness it for the better. And so the virtual and the biologic worlds are really coming together in a melding, which is super powerful.
I'm gonna come back to you in a bit, Dr. Otley, to ask about telemedicine and kind of where you see that going. Before I do that, Brent, one of your strategies to future-proof is wire scoring. Having that kind of infrastructure. In the last 90 days, what have you thought about that is sort of a new version of future-proofing of a life science building?
I think it's not a surprise that the pandemic and how we operate within buildings has changed from reevaluating our HVAC systems to ensure that there's no cross-contamination. But I think, what's unique about the second phase, and as we thought about the second phase in relation to the first phase, is that we're really trying to take a campus approach. So the amenities that we've contemplated for the second building were really focused on larger conference room spaces, spaces for events, and larger spaces for collaboration. So we kind of had to take a step back to understand how those spaces might be used differently in the future, obviously, in the face of COVID. And I think, it's something we're still evaluating, but I do think that the way that we've structured the spaces, maybe they're not going to be used and have events of 150 people, maybe it's 50 to allow for those spaces. But that's really kind of the pivots that we're making right now. We still believe that there's going to be a time, and hopefully the not too distant future, where the way that we structure the spaces will still be needed for that type of collaboration. But we're still in the midst of evaluating it right now. And we do think that it will come back around.
Thank you, Mike. Let's turn back to you and talk about some of the work that you've been thinking about when you've been thinking about, though there are challenges about repurposing buildings, there are also some opportunities. Maybe you just talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, sure. So I think there will be a certain number of buildings that are existing and were not purpose-built that can qualify to potentially be converted to laboratory research.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in individual markets, because the supply side of real estate for good quality research space is so tight across the country that it would be a good thing in general for most markets to have a few office buildings converted. And the strengths around that thought are that, one, it would be less expensive than the purpose-built buildings, probably not too much less expensive, because as Brent said, you're going to spend money in order to convert the facility.
Sure.
Most of these office buildings that will be successful doing this are going to be well located, good access to public transportation, amenities, etc. They might even have some reasonable proximity to a university or research institute. And certainly the timing of being able to bring this space online, as opposed to going through the greenfield plan of having to design, plan, get approvals, start construction, build the shell, all of which could take anywhere from 18 to 24 months. So you've got a very long cycle that you have to deal with there, waiting for these new, beautiful and functional buildings. And in the meantime, some companies just aren't going to be able to wait. And some companies are going to be interested in the price sensitive aspect of some of these conversions. So there will be some success there, but all in all, they still can't compete with the location of being on a campus, purpose-built, with innovation as the primary culture in the campus and access to the basic science that's going on in hospitals and universities.
So what I'm hearing is buildings that are near good public transportation, proximal to universities or hospitals. So therefore, they have that proximity asset that Pamela talked about. That they could be delivered more quickly and available more quickly, and with less expensive rents. We have a question. I'm gonna turn this to you, Brent. We have a question in our chat box from Lee Mathis. And the question is wire score something that can be achieved retroactively, or is it only with new construction?
It can be achieved retroactively. Obviously, there will be an additional expense to that just because you'll have to conduit access points throughout the building, but there are various ways. The biggest comparable to a wired score is lead scored. So there's different things that you can do to hit the right metrics. And there's a lot of creative ways that you can do it. But Obviously, it's a lot easier to do when you're contemplating doing wired score as you're designing a brand new building.
Okay, great. So it can be done, and it's something that that developers should be thinking about as they're considering potential buildings to repurpose. There is another question that has to do with rents, and I'll read the question, and I'll see if Mike, this is one that perhaps you could respond to. What range of rents are typically achievable relative to the increased capital required to convert a building to a life science tenant?
So it really comes down, Patrick, to what's been invested in the building.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to vary between markets because construction pricing varies between markets. But generally speaking, if we're talking about life science friendly landlords, if they're investing $250 to $300 a square foot in the base shell of an urban building, and they're willing to put $150 a square foot into the tenant improvements, they're probably looking at a rent constant of somewhere between 8 and 9%. So 9% as a factor applied to the total cost of the building basically gives you the rent. The rents across the country vary widely. West Coast, San Francisco, San Diego, pretty much for new construction, multi-story, going to be in the range of, I'd say, $47 to $55 triple net. And in Boston, $90 triple net.
Sure.
In some places in San Francisco, as much as $90 per square foot triple net.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In New York City, $110 a square foot triple net.
Sure.
In Philadelphia, about $52 to $55 a square foot triple net. And in RTP, in the Raleigh-Durham area, you're looking at about $65 to $70 triple net.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So it
big spread.
All over the country.
A big spread. Pam, you had said, and you work with a lot of startup companies where capital and preserving capital is really important. And all things being equal, I trust the companies you invest in and support would choose a less expensive location than the more expensive location. But what are the values that would make a more expensive location more attractive and worth the extra cost of occupancy?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to the specific equipment and facilities that are required for the startup. And I think there's been a long history of life science startups, renting these spaces. And so the rent is built into the budget and the fundraising budget. So that's a pretty established practice. But for very early stage startups, which perhaps are not great candidates for these buildings that we're talking about, that's where the sensitivity to rent would really matter. And that's where having some shared spaces where possible, and often it's not possible because of the confidentiality of the work that's being done, but there can be some shared wet lab space and certainly shared office space, co-working space that can be shared to reduce that cost. And I think if you're in a community where there are a lot of early stage life science startups, that is a tremendous offering to those companies.
Mm-hmm. Just to push you a little further on that, you described ways of potentially reducing the cost burden. Are there things, and the reason I'm asking this question is that on this in this webinar, we have people who are probably evaluating options for buildings that they might want to repurpose. And I just am trying to tease out of this, are there things that they should understand would be considered more valuable by the kinds of companies that you work with?
Hey, before you answer that question, can I ask?
Well, I think
before you answer that question, I need to ask one quick CE question to the. There's a few people here today that are looking for real estate continuing ed. So if you need the real estate continuing ed on the right-hand side, just answer this question. If you're in Minnesota have you ever visited the Mayo Clinic in Rochester? That's my first CE question of the day. Yes or no on the right-hand side. Yes, I've visited it, or no, I have not. So, all right, take it away. On to the next segment.
Thank you. So Pam, back to you.
Yeah, I'm trying to think how to concisely answer that. And I would say over the years of working with startups, one of the most important things about these spaces, in addition to the fundamentals, which is having the equipment that you need, having the bandwidth, super high bandwidth is going to be very valuable to everyone. It's really having a culture and a set of people where you can, if you're going to be in a space, you can have these drive-by conversations. There's experts and other people that can really help you build your company. And so to create that environment, it used to be called programming, where these incubators or research parks would provide specific programming. I think we've moved to a different realm where that's still important, but having an overall culture of innovation, a culture of understanding startups, a culture of helping each other is really valuable to an early stage company.
Same question to you. Thank you. Same question to you, Dr. Otley. As you think about the businesses that you're working with, what do they most value in as it relates to not only cost of occupancy, and we should operate from the assumption that people are price sensitive and they want to avoid spending money where they don't have to. But have you seen it play out in Rochester, where people have chosen more expensive, more costly on the front end because there are certain things that it adds value? There's certain values that one gets out of that proximity or location.
Yeah, I think there are certain must-haves, from a technologic point of view. If you need to have particular wet lab space and things, you have no choice but to get that. Other than that, it really depends, I think, mostly on the life stage of the company. The startups, they can't afford it, and so they're scrapping and trying to find whatever space they can find, whereas the more large established companies want that kind of more centralized space, and they can afford it, and they get the benefits of having those kind of greater connections associated with the nicer space that is really a calling card for a community. But I would say that the large companies attract those small companies and welcome them in often. So it's a nice ecosystem of collaboration.
Great. I said I was going to ask you a question about telemedicine. I was a registered nurse 30 years ago, and we were talking about telemedicine back then, and we're still talking about telemedicine. What's happening in the world of telemedicine, and what might that translate to with respect to real estate development?
It's been a real explosion. I mean, we went from thinking about telemedicine and doing some telemedicine at Mayo Clinic, probably 1% of our visits. In the course of 2 months, we went up to about 70% because we didn't know how to keep our patients safe, and we needed to adapt. So we adapted incredibly on the fly, and thank goodness that our telecommunications infrastructure was there to support us, because we couldn't have done this years ago. The other thing that happened was the government said we've got to take away all the regulations that prohibit us from easily doing this across state lines or having reimbursement issues. So it's opened things wide open. And now we've proven it can work most often. The cognitive specialties, it's easier for if you just are talking with somebody. If you actually have to interact with their body, that's a tougher conundrum. And now we're entering the phase where we're really trying to figure out how do we optimize telemedicine, use it for things that are very value added, and then not waste people's times when they actually do need to see the doctor or nurse. So lots of innovation across every spectrum of telemedicine, and it's a really exciting time, and an area where I think you're going to see a need for space that is flexible so that we can accommodate the telemedical services for our patients.
Yeah, it's been exciting to see that, and as you mentioned, just the explosion of maybe all of the infrastructure that Pamela helped lay years ago. Those pipes really playing out in today's environment where people were not able to see participate physically. Mike, do you want to talk about this next slide? This idea of kind of opportunities around the supply and demand and the kinds of services that are needed in the foreseeable future.
Sure. Again, going back to the short supply of good quality, high-end, what I would call research space, the lack of it and the long construction cycles in between have put a lot of pressure on the markets in terms of demand. And as a result, this pressure on the supply is you can only act so fast when considering either converting your building or building new. It will translate into additional rents and rent dollars. And we're not only seeing it in development and construction of buildings, we're seeing a very active market for the investors who typically buy real estate. It used to be that there were maybe 6 or 7 developer types, investor types around the country that were buying big portfolios of life sciences real estate. Now, I must get 7 or 8 calls a week from a developer who wants to get into the market and understand the market. And that kind of pressure on the sales price of larger portfolios is eventually going to catch up in the form of rent, higher rents. Because the new buyers are coming into the market just because they feel they have to. It's a safe avenue for them to travel down. And those new buyers are paying higher prices, and higher prices are going to definitely transfer into higher rents. It'll take a little bit of time, but that is happening. And the market, I've never seen the market like this before.
Well, I see there's a question in the chat box that Dr. Otley graciously responded to in the chat box. But Dr. Otley, could you reflect on the question? And I think it ties to what Mike is talking about. But this question about how is Mayo using its experience here in Rochester across its portfolio of campuses, Scottsdale and Jacksonville in particular?
Yeah, we really feel lucky at Mayo Clinic to have a national footprint, and it allows us to kind of regionalize and try some different things in different areas while at the same time having that kind of Mayo Clinic quality core. And so there's an incubator program at Mayo Clinic in Florida where there are a lot of life sciences companies actually on the Mayo Clinic Florida campus that are looking to partner with the physician scientist investigators on that campus. It's going well. And we've got programmatic things that try to foster that ecosystem. In Arizona, there's a big opportunity. There's a biomedical corridor adjacent to the Mayo Clinic in Arizona campus. And that's been under development consideration for a long time. And I think plans are progressing to try to develop that in conjunction with a collaboration with Arizona State University. We have a great innovation partnership with them. So I'd say on both campuses, there is significant activity and considerations related to how do we maximize the utility of adjacent or on-campus space.
So I think you're really describing a philosophy, which is this intersection between physicians and scientists and the marketplace. And I think that's what you've talked about, Pam, when you've talked about the connection with universities and this idea that by more and more as we're really investing in innovation and trying to put innovators next to people who can commercialize and take innovation to market. So it seems to me, and I may be making my own case here, and Brent, I'm going to pitch this question to you, although I don't see your face on the screen, so I don't know if that means you have bandwidth issues and not able to respond. So I'll give it a try, which is, Brent, as you're looking around the country, and certainly Mortensen has made a long-term commitment into life science development, where would you say are, Dr. Otley mentioned the Mayo campuses, Jacksonville and Scottsdale, but where are there some other opportunities around this intersection between physicians and scientists and researchers at universities and hospitals? Either you don't want to give away any trade secrets, or or we've lost you.
I think you lost him. So hey, I got one quick question, one other CE question for anybody in Minnesota that needs real estate CE. Anybody that in Minnesota, like I said, that needs real estate CE. Have you used telemedicine before, or have you not ever used telemedicine before? So that's my question: is yes, I've used telemedicine, or no, I have not used telemedicine. All right, back to you, Patrick.
Thank you, Jeff. So we are down to the last few minutes of today's program, and I think I'd like to give each of our panelists a chance to make a closing comment. And again, remember, the audience are people who are really trying to learn about what is the future of the life science industry, and where is it that they can contribute to supporting the growth and investment. And I'll turn to you, Dr. Otley, first, and just see if you have any additional comments or things that you came prepared to talk about that I didn't give you an opportunity to do so.
Thanks, Patrick. I think it is a boom time for the life sciences, unfortunately brought about by a global catastrophe. But with this disruption, there's a ton of opportunity for change and innovation. I would say, I'll go back to one of Pam's points, which is figure out what your clients want. Mm-hmm. And be flexible and create a modularity so that if they want something now, but the reality changes in 12 months, you're prepared to kind of move and change things in real time. But it's an exciting time, and I hope that our national economy just continues to recover, because that'll have a major impact on all of our potentials. Modularity,
I like that term. Pamela?
Yeah, to piggyback on that, I would say this movement of moving out of the private office space and into open shared co-working space is real. It's very, very real. Private offices will never go away. There's a need for them, but creating environments where people can collaborate is super important in the life sciences, because these early stage technologies, there's a lot of risk, there's a lot of unknowns. And so bringing a lot of smart people to the table to help make decisions about all those uncertainties and those risks is really key. And so creating spaces where you're innovating around bringing people together, acknowledging that we will probably have future pandemics and being prepared for that, so people feel safe in your space. I think those are really, really important considerations to keep in mind.
Don't know if we've lost me now this time.
No.
We can still. And Brent's back.
I'm back.
Brent,
sorry. Start.
Yep. So Brent, we're making final comments and observations, and giving you the floor to do that in the last minute or two here.
Great. I think, obviously our focus and experience has been rooted in Rochester. And I think what's been really unique is, and the reason why we're doing the second building is because, the first building was wildly successful, and now it's trying to capture on that opportunity, but allowing the companies that have committed to be there to grow. And then also, just with the change in technology and the requirements, we're kind of creating a different experience for the second building. I think a lot of the comments that Dr. Otley made and Pam made, as well as Mike, are all the reasons why we're continuing to invest in Rochester and in this field. So I think it's going to continue to be interesting and dynamic. And I think I'm excited to see kind of how things do change and do come back after COVID.
Thank you, Brent and Mike.
I think I'm going to piggyback on what Brent has said. If you're looking at campuses, major campuses, and or innovation type communities, one of the key things that a lot of them are missing and should seriously think about in the future is having some availability of clinical scale manufacturing. And being able to do that The easiest way to do it is through a contract development and manufacturing organization. So CDMOs are turning up on campuses and they provide a terrific service for these companies to initiate their clinical related materials and products that they need. And not talking about commercializing yet, just to get through the clinic, but we're seeing them being joined and collaborating with campuses across the country.
Well, thank you for those final comments, and I especially want to thank you, Mike, for preparing the outline of the presentation that I think was so helpful in orchestrating this conversation, and to the scientists on the call, Dr. Otley, and to Pamela York, thank you for all that you do and the way in which you support and foster innovation. And Brent Mortensen and the partnership we've had with you over the years in Rochester and at Destination Medical Center is greatly appreciated. And I also want to acknowledge RE Journal, and Jeff, you're back with us, and you can bring us home. But I want to thank you, and we really appreciate the partnership that we have with your organization.
Yes, thank you very much to all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules. And this webinar, in addition to other webinars, can be found at our website at rejournals.com/video replay. Thank you once again, Patrick, Pam, Mike, Brent, and Dr. Clark. Thank you very much to all of you for being involved today. Thank you, and have a beautiful afternoon and a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks,
everybody.
folks. Thanks for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you.